Eli Lilly just showed that Tirzepatide can get you up to 25% weight loss. But guess who paid for this trial? Novo Nordisk. The same Novo Nordisk that just announced that Wegovy will be 50% cheaper starting in 2027, that Ozempic will be 35% cheaper starting in 2027, and this timing could not be more interesting. There's tons of data to get into this week on the episode of the Weekly Dose podcast. Let's jump into it.
Welcome to the On the Pen podcast with your host, Dave Knapp.
Welcome back to the On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, man on the Manjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Manjaro, Zepbound, Compound, Retatrutide. Doesn't matter what pen you're on. That's why you're here, to learn more about these medications so that you can have better conversations with your doctor. So welcome back. If you enjoy our podcast here, leave it a 5-star rating and review. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an update from the channel. The bell will notify your phone every time we go live, which we do Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 12 p.m. Central Eastern on YouTube every single Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So make sure you join us for that over on YouTube. We've got a ton to get into today, but I want to thank our sponsor first and foremost, Shed. If you are somebody who lives with the chronic disease of obesity and you have flat out felt shut out by your medical provider, you should look no further than Shed to get connected with a medical provider who cares and can help you navigate the treatment of obesity, whether you're looking for the branded medications or compounded versions to help mitigate side effects. They've got a little bit of something for every situation there. And so I hope you'll check them out. If you do use code OTP25, you're going to save 25% off of the tab there on obesity treatment. And I don't think you'll regret checking out Shed. And thank you to them for bringing this sponsorship to the podcast and helping to bring this information each and every week, which is empowering all of you to have better conversations with your doctor. I hear from you every week, letting me know how much the information is impacting you positively. And so I just thank you all for the kind and positive feedback that you've given me. Well, let's get into the news today, because there's a ton to cover. Now, if you've been following us and following the live streams that we're doing over on YouTube every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern, you have been deluged with information, everything from clinical trial data that has dropped to the fact that we've got quick pens now for Zepbound, the adjustable dose pens that you can now get through Lilly Direct. We've also broken news in the last couple of days about another slew of FDA letters that have gone out to compounders and to telehealth companies, kind of going after their marketing on compounded versions of GLP-1 medications. We brought you a ton of news, but I want to tell you about a story that just dropped today, which sets up an interesting conversation for the rest of the podcast and the other news that hit. But we learned today that Novo Nordisk is actually going to cut the prices of Semaglutide in half. Now, we're talking specifically today about the list prices for the medication through insurance. Now, we've seen some pretty steep price cuts in terms of the Wegovy pill that came to market at $149 to start, $299 for the upper dose, which is as effective as the injectable version of Wegovy. Now, this is specifically for those with insurance. They're cutting the price of Wegovy by 50% and Ozempic by 35%. And this is all at the same time that their next generation obesity combination CagriSema data dropped, which we're going to get into as well. But I want to talk a little bit about what this price drop means, because effective January 1st of 2027, Wegovy, Ozempic, and Rybelsus will be $675 a month list price, which is roughly a 50% reduction for Wegovy and about 35% for Ozempic. And that's going to be for all doses. So this is actually the wholesale acquisition cost for the distributors. And this is the nuance. So this is like what it means for you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be paying 50% less. It mainly helps patients whose out-of-pocket costs with insurance are tied directly to the list price of the medication, because there will be new arbitrations between the cost and the plans that start next year. But if you have a plan where your out-of-pocket costs are tied directly to the list price of the medication, especially folks on high deductible health plans or co-insurance models, if you pay 20% of the list price, cutting the list price in half is meaningfully going to lower your bill on the cost of these medications. But this does not affect the cash pay options. Now, I do anticipate we'll see further price reductions from both Lilly and Novo over the coming months, but this is specifically tied to those with insurance because it's going to be the list price. Now, that's the price that they're always comparing to the rest of the world. When we talk about like most favored nations, what is Europe paying for these drugs? What are the folks in Australia paying for those drugs? When they say we're paying, 10 times that amount, the list price is the amount. And that's the starting price where the drug company comes in and negotiates with the insurance companies, the PBMs and the wholesale distributors in terms of the cost of the medication. So if you're already in that self-pay channel, this is not going to impact you, but this is about folks on insurance. And it's really more about optics and positioning than anything. We heard from Lars Jorgensen, who was the former CEO of Novo Nordisk, testifying on Capitol Hill. They were asking him, in fact, why don't you just lower the cost of these medications using the list price at the time over $1,100-$1,200, comparing that to the couple of $100 that they paid elsewhere in the world. And he said, the reality is, given our current system, we can lower the cost, but that doesn't mean it'll necessarily be passed on to the patients. And what he was saying was, like here, you see they've lowered the cost 50%, but if you're already paying, let's say, $50 for Ozempic or Wegovy, next year likely that won't change. It will just be that the cost to your plan will be less. So it's interesting positioning. It definitely drives down the cost of the medications for the insurance companies to acquire, and so you may see broader coverage for both of these medications coming next year because it will be less acquisition costs or less cost to cover on the insurance plans. But we'll have to see how it all shakes out. It's fine. I find it interesting to be told 1 year by the CEO that it wouldn't make a difference for patients if they lowered the price, and then to have them lowering the price within 12 months of that is kind of interesting. So we'll see how that all shakes out for patients, but in the meantime, it's headed the right direction. Now, this all happened at the same time that we learned that the CagriSema versus Tirzepatide trial, this was known as the Redefine 4 trial, and it was literally a head-to-head trial comparing patients on Tirzepatide to patients on CagriSema. CagriSema is the next generation of semaglutide from Novo Nordisk, which combines it with an amylin agonist called cagrilintide. And so it's a dual agonist, right? You focusing on GLP-1 and amylin. And this was a 84-week open label study. So a long trial comparing, and in fact, they just extended it a couple of months ago to be 84 weeks long, hoping, I think, to get more weight loss out of CagriSema. So it was comparing CagriSema 2.4 milligrams of Cag and 2.4 milligrams of Sema respectively against 15 milligrams of Tirzepatide. This was 809 adults living with obesity with a main baseline weight of 114.2 kilograms. Now, when they do this weird estimate of if people would have adhered to the treatment, I mean, it's kind of like a backdoor way of not saying a lot of people didn't get to the highest dose. So basically they have this math equation that comes up with if everyone adhered to the treatment, which showed that CagriSema achieved 23% weight loss at 84 weeks, but Tirzepatide achieved 25.5% weight loss over the same time. So using the treatment regimen estimate, which is what I just explained to you, which accounts for discontinuation rates and real world factors, CagriSema hit 20% and Tirzepatide hit 23.6%. So ultimately, the goal of this trial was to basically prove non-inferiority of cagrilintide and CagriSema to Tirzepatide, and it fell short because it missed that endpoint. 23% weight loss is a massive number. And that would have been unimaginable long ago when we were talking about, Saxenda, which was like 9% weight loss or something around there. And yet in this market, it was not enough. Investors saw this as another huge miss for CagriSema, with Tirzepatide still pretty decently outperforming it. Now, there's a lot of banter around on the internet from obesity providers saying the 2% isn't clinically meaningful. And I think I would echo that statement in a way. I would say for investors, this is disappointing. You're hoping to get higher weight loss with this. But I think the point that some of the obesity specialists are out there making is well served. Cagrilintide and CagriSema will be a better solution for many people over Tirzepatide. Maybe not most, but for those who have a hard time with the GIP that is in Tirzepatide, or just the molecule itself doesn't play well with their body, with their biology, CagriSema is going to be a great option, and it's going to be available early 2027 is when Novo is eyeing a launch. Now, in the meantime, we're going to see 7.2 milligrams of semaglutide, straight semaglutide, in the form of a drug they're calling Wegovy Plus, hit the market in the coming months. And that 7.2 milligram, that really high dose of semaglutide, actually gets right up there to similar weight loss as we see with Tirzepatide. So this is disappointing news to find that CagriSema doesn't get there right any better than you see with necessarily high dose semaglutide, but they will be running phase 3 tests with higher doses of cagrilintide and CagriSema to show, what it is ultimately capable of at higher doses. So it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out, because this was an open label study, and that means that folks knew what drug they were on. Perhaps they were influenced by knowing that they were on Tirzepatide. CagriSema being a GLP-1 plus amylin combination. Some folks might have been a little more hesitant, having heard positive things online about Tirzepatide. But the interesting thing that we see here is that Tirzepatide remains the more potent agent at 84 weeks, and in a highly competitive market where Lilly has seemed to have been eating Novo Nordisk's lunch, so to speak. This was a huge win for Eli Lilly. We saw that reflected in the stock price. Now, to step back for just a moment, we can kind of look at the way that this is shaping up, right? Because Novo cuts the semaglutide price in half. Investors respond to that. At the same time, they released this data on the next generation CagriSema not beating Eli Lilly's flagship in a head-to-head. This timing, I think, is strategic, because lowering the list price is going to strengthen Novo Nordisk's formulary positioning in the future, meaning they'll get probably better access to insurance coverage, and it helps to sort of protect their market share. It also helps to protect employers and the cost of covering GLP-1 medications, and hopefully make this more broadly accessible through the insurance channels. And I think that this is important and welcome. I had the chance to sit down with Bloomberg last week and discuss this, and I thought, what I said at the time was, I want to see these drug companies do more in terms of developing the insurance channels, because quite frankly, it's just hard to stomach as a patient paying like what we pay, $30,000 a year for insurance premiums, but then to turn around and have to pay $500 out of pocket for obesity treatment, when ultimately it's making me healthier for my insurance policy plan, and it's not counting towards my deductibles, which are extremely high. So it's just a hard pill to swallow. So I said at the time, I wanted to see these drug companies focusing on the payer market. This would be an example of Novo Nordisk doing exactly that. And it will help to stabilize semaglutide's position in the place as these sort of innovation and price wars continue, because it's no longer about proving whether or not these drugs work for a large swath of the population. They're going to work. It's about who gets access to them and who is able to maintain access to them. And we are literally officially in a world where 23% weight loss is not even good enough to win. So the molecules are there in terms of the future. And we're going to talk a little bit about what is going on in that world too, because we got some really interesting data on a triple agonist from Novo Nordisk, and we're going to get into that a little bit today too. So we've spent a lot of time on today's podcast talking about the single agonists and the dual agonists, but what about the triple agonists, the Retatrutides of the world, Retatrutides of the world. There are multiple companies who have triple agonists in clinical trials. And we got some data from Novo Nordisk on phase 2 top line information out of China. So that's important to know that this is a Chinese study, and the results of these medications in the Chinese population are going to be specific to their population, often differ from the population in the United States. But this phase 2 data was for a molecule called UBT251. Again, we can never have, an easy, to remember names of these medications, but this is a triple agonist. At 24 weeks, the highest dose delivered 19.7% weight loss. Now, we're just talking about how CagriSema over 84 weeks was at around 23% weight loss, Tirzepatide 25% weight loss. This is at 24 weeks, and it was 19.7% weight loss with no plateau being observed. Now, this was in 205 Chinese participants with a mean body weight of 92.2 kilograms. Now, we just talked about how the CagriSema trial was like 114 kilograms starting weight. Placebo only lost 2% in this population, and it was a once weekly injection for those on UBT 251. And on paper, that is a monster result at 24 weeks. Now, naturally, everybody's going to ask the same question. How does this compare to Retatrutide? So we need to sort of stay disciplined here and remember that these trials comparing between each other is a really fragile comparison. But if we look at 24 weeks in the New England Journal, phase 2 for Retatrutide in a similar population in the United States, Retatrutide, and I don't know, similar is even a stretch, right? These are higher starting body weights, a different population, different diet, etc. But Retatrutide achieved up to 17.5% in 24 weeks. So if you're just looking at what was UBT in their trial versus Retatrutide in their trial at 24 weeks, you have 19.7% weight loss for UBT 251 and 17.5% for Retatrutide. So on paper, it kind of looks like a win for Novo, which they kind of needed in the middle of all this. But we have to be honest, because again, comparing across trials is not really a fair comparison. There's different countries, different baseline weights, different dose escalation strategies, different statistical handling. So we're comparing a top-line Novo press release to peer-reviewed data from Eli Lilly, and it's just not a clean head-to-head comparison. But if you want a geographically comparable number, you can look at Kylera, which we've talked about a little bit on this channel, but Kylera has a GLP-1 GIP called HRS 9531, and this is again a GLP-1 GIP. It showed 17.2% placebo-adjusted weight loss at 24 weeks in a Chinese population with a baseline weight of 84.5 kilograms, so even lower starting weight. And its dual agonist hit 17.2% placebo-adjusted weight loss. So it kind of helps to anchor the results regionally, even though it's a little bit different of a molecule being a dual agonist versus a triple agonist. But even there, we're comparing placebo adjusted versus mean percent, and the formatting number alone here can sort of change the perception of all this. But here's the real signal. Triple agonism consistently pushes weight loss into the high teens by 24 weeks. We're seeing that across all of these trials. So your high teen weight loss by 24 weeks. And again, it's not that the faster weight loss is better, but ultimately these phase 2 are to show, what could these possibly show in longer studies where the titration is spread out a little bit wider. How can we iron out some of the side effects and things like that? So Retatrutide showed it first in the United States, but UBT 251 from a triple agonist standpoint just reinforced it in China that these triple agonists have very potent ability to bring down weight, and the ceiling just keeps moving higher for these injectable options. And so that's why I'm always kind of saying here at On the Pen, we're getting there from a molecule standpoint to where there's going to be an option for everyone, which will ultimately move this conversation to the quality of weight loss. And so The real question with these triple agonists will be who can sort of sustain the weight loss curve at 48 weeks and beyond in the longer clinical trials in terms of like determining which one will be the best. But again, I want to start to reframe this conversation, even though it's sensational and gets clicks, to not what molecule is better because it was better in a clinical trial, but what's best for you, because what's best in a clinical trial does not equal what's best for you in your metabolic situation. Like we've said, there are many people who are metabolically healthy taking Retatrutide online when probably for their goals would be just fine using something like Semaglutide or using something like Tirzepatide without the glucagon agonism. But, ultimately at the end of the day, this is information that's to empower you to have better conversations with your doctor and ultimately to determine what is the best medication and treatment for you in your situation? Because these clinical trials are just that. They're just a data point to try to make decisions off of. And what is best for you is not always going to track with what was best in the clinical trial. So just a point of information to consider as you're processing all this information. And finally, some exciting news for an option that isn't a weekly injectable and it isn't surgery. It's like something that lives in between. It's an outpatient procedure. Now, we've covered that. Remember when we had on Shantanu Gore of Allurion, and he said, imagine swallowing a capsule and months later you're down double digits without surgery or lifelong injections. Well, that just got totally real because this week, Allurion's swallowable gastric balloon just received FDA approval. And if you've been listening to the show, listening to the podcast, you already know that this one's been quietly sort of sitting in that middle lane between GLP-1 and surgery, which is why I get really excited about things like what they're doing at Allurion and what they're doing at companies like Fractal Health. Now this is official because it's been approved. So just a quick refresher, because most of you remember the mechanics of how this works, but you swallow a capsule in the office and it inflates into a balloon that has about a half a liter of fluid inside of it. The whole visit takes around 15 minutes is all. And then this balloon sits in the stomach for 4 months. Then it empties on its own and passes naturally through your system with no scope, no anesthesia, no removal procedure. This isn't new information for most of you if you've been following along on the podcast. If you haven't and you want to learn more about this, I will link it in the description and the show notes so that you can go back and watch the latest interview with the CEO of Allurion, Mr. Shantanu Gore. But what is new information here is that it is now cleared by the FDA. It's approved, which changes everything. So real quick refresher on the data here. Patients on this lost 10 to 15% total body weight over 4 months. And in people with type 2 diabetes, that was often north of 15%, which is different because most of the time you see folks with diabetes on like GLP-1 therapies losing less. So that's really exciting for somebody like me, but we need to be honest about these results. In a world where we're casually talking about 23 and 25 and 30% weight loss with triple agonists, pushing to the high teens at 24 weeks, 10 to 15 might not sound super explosive, but here's the difference. This is 4 months. This is no surgery, no weekly injections, and something that likely can be combined with those therapies to improve weight loss. So for a certain slice of patients, this matters more than chasing the absolute ceiling. This is like a adjunct treatment, a tool in the arsenal of treating obesity. So one of the things that stood out when talking to Shantanu last time he was on is that unlike the high doses of GLP-1 therapy where hunger can sort of disappear completely for people, the balloon still lets you feel the feeling of hunger. You just physically can't eat as much because there isn't as much there, which helps patients to force kind of a portion recalibration and retrain the behavior, something that GLP-1s, you could argue, maybe don't do as good of a job at doing. And so they lean heavily into this behavior change program at Allurion, which you become a part of for these 4 months. So the durability number that he cited was the patients who stayed engaged with the program maintained about 95% of their weight loss a year after the balloon. Again, staying engaged in the Allurion weight loss program. So 4 months with the balloon, 12 months after, most of these people who stayed engaged 95% with the program had kept their weight off. And that's their thesis for patients, is that this actually will help people have durable weight loss likely an adjunct to GLP-1 medication. So is this a replacement for GLP-1s? No. Is it a replacement for bariatric surgery? No, but it's something that lives kind of like right in the middle and can be thought of maybe as an adjunct therapy. So for those of you who are like, well, this is like the first time that I've heard of this, or I've heard of balloons before, this is different because of the way that it's administered. It's a quick outpatient procedure. There's no anesthesia involved. It's much more easy for patients and accessible for patients to get. And if you're wondering about like, what's the cost of this thing going to be, as Shantanu explained on the podcast a few weeks ago, the program is typically structured over 6 to 12 months. And when financed, he said the cost is roughly in line with brand name GLP-1 pricing. So here's the key difference. It's not forever. The balloon portion is for 4 months. And after that, the support costs drop for the staying in the weight loss program. So most of that cost is going to be upfront for the 4 months with the balloon. Insurance coverage is going to be the wild card, right? So if you're talking about when can I get this, then we're talking about insurance has to pick up, coverage for something like this. And Allurion, according to Shantanu, has been working with employers and payers who are all looking for alternatives to GLP-1s to add to the formulary. So we'll see what happens with this one, but definitely now that this FDA approval is in hand, those conversations can get more serious between Allurion and these payers. And hopefully we will see a broadening of access to a additional option, another tool in the arsenal to fight against obesity. We love that more options are here. And obesity is not about one lane. It's not just about injections. It's not just about surgeries or pills. It's about having adjunct treatments that can help people to get to where they want to be. And that's why we get really excited about something like the gastric balloon from Allurion. Can't wait to talk to Shantanu again. Congratulations to them and their team, and mostly congratulations to patients who now have additional options. So really exciting stuff. Thank you for hanging out with me. If you're listening to the podcast, don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating and review. Jump on over and subscribe to our email newsletter at obesity.news. Check out the show notes for everything that we talked about here today. Thank you for being here and for being the best part of what we do. And make sure you join us on our live streams every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Can't wait to see you there. Until the next one, we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you, my friend.